My topic for tonight, the dimension of wonder, which I would like to spend a little time with you on. It's interesting that it came up tonight in your shares, consciousness. Although I feel often a little, words have these flavors to them. And there's something about the word consciousness that's a little sterile for me. And yet it's one of the words we have. And And yet, the actual experience is quite profound. If you can take a moment and wonder, what am I? What is here? What is looking out of these eyes? What is hearing in these ears? What is feeling the body? And if you turn your attention to that, to what is looking out of your eyes, what is hearing in your ears, and or what is feeling in your body, what do you notice happens? I mean, because it's a because it's a question, your mind may be conditioned to think it's supposed to come up with an answer. And so it may start suggesting answers. You may have read books on consciousness, you may have, you know, theories of consciousness yourself. I certainly have them. But when you do the direct observation, when you do the yogic thing, which is what I'm really pointing you to, the the immediacy of experience, what happens? I mean, what happens to me is the mind kind of goes silent in a kind of not knowing, a very productive kind of not knowing. Because there you are seeing, and there's an experience of seeing, but it's not clear what sees. And we make it into a who, and we put the pronoun I on it, and that seems to make it understandable. It makes it appear as if we know what I is, but what am I? I sometimes hear it as who am I? Um, but I sometimes like the word what instead. Doesn't prejudice it quite as much as who. Well, I'm me, this experience of self that we're having. And what is that? It can be a source of constant wonder and mystery. I sometimes am astonished how words just drop in. You know, we use the I like, okay, I'm speaking, I'm thinking, but there's this funny thing going on that I don't know if I can even explain it in words, but the next thing arises to say that's in a kind of stream from the last thing that you said, or the last thing that I said, whoever I is. So there's this sort of stream that's happening, and the next thing comes in. And it all reflects an understanding, but where is the understanding? Where does it exist? You know, all of these connections. And the direct experience of it, the actual experience of it is, I don't know. And this understanding, this putting the words together, just kind of drops in of itself. Or doesn't. Sometimes you're like stuck and you almost feel like something reaching inside of you for the next thing to say. Is that you? May we label that me? I'm reaching? It's a source of endless kind of jaw-dropping wonder if you take this on. Begin to see, without, when you ask the question, it's a way of taking the familiar away from the experience. We've been using the pronoun I since we began to talk, although I think me is probably the first word people use, and I comes later. There's probably developmental psychologists could tell you why, perhaps. But yeah. So there's the experience of who am I? Another thing that I sometimes do is, and I have to get up high enough so you can see I'm pointing at my heart. What is this? I mean, there's a what is this in terms of, all our thoughts and our cognitions, that whole kind of thing. So what is it? What is this? There have been moments when I've felt so strongly something speaking from here rather than from here. It has a complete different quality. And so I get why we distinguish it. I remember a moment on an intensive silent retreat when I was kind of doing walking meditation, and I got off on this kind of thought train of, I wanna awaken, I wanna, get somewhere, da 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 da. And I heard so clearly coming straight from my heart, I'm here. My mind was off, like looking into the future, imagining some future self, imagining this, that, and that. And it's like something just from the chest said, hey, I'm here. It's already here. You don't have to go looking. It's in you. So there's the sheer fact of, experience, that we're having experiences of ourself, which we call consciousness. And this thing that I'm calling the heart, which seems to be, for whatever reason, it has a geography. Consciousness has a geography in the body. And there is a kind of a heart knowing. It's different than a head knowing, different than a belly knowing, And so what is that? This place that feels touched. Everyone's interested in artificial intelligence. What about feeling? And by that, I don't necessarily mean just emoting. I'm not just talking about anger, fear, sadness, joy. I'm talking about sensation, subtle sensations. And this sensation I'm calling being touched. The way that I heard a story today on a podcast. I was listening to a podcast on animal telepathy, or telepathy with animals, and animal telepathy itself, telepathy among animals. And it was a story of a man in Africa, I forget which countries, who was told about this herd of elephants that were causing trouble. And, the villagers were kind of wanting to exterminate them. And, they were getting into a lot of trouble. They were getting hurt. And it was a bad situation. And he somehow gained this herd's trust and moved them to a reserve a couple of 100 miles away. They followed him. And he had this connection with them. I called him the animal whisperer. And I can't remember his name. My mind isn't very good at remembering names when I first hear them. Called him the elephant whisperer. The story that really touched me was that when this man died, the elephants were a few miles away from his house. And when he died, they all came and gathered around his house. And they wailed for like 12 hours. How did they know? How did they know he was dead? They didn't see him dead on the ground. They knew to come to the house. How did they know that? And that kind of got to me. And then on the same day every year that he died, for 3 years, they came again. They came and they circled his house and they made noises, maybe not quite as much the first year. But it was like, wow, they are paying their respects to this human being who helped them. It's like, whoa. And what is that? What is that in me that can be touched by that to the point of getting teary? And I can't quite even name the feeling. It's not tears of sadness. It's not tears of joy. It's tears of love, of poignancy. I'm not sure what the noun is there. Of something of witnessing in another animal that kind of connectedness and grief. And it made me in that moment feel like, boy, we don't have a clue what we're living among. We don't really have a clue. This whole biosphere, so many animals, so many plants, so many things, fungi, everything else that are all in relationship to each other. We're trying to figure it out, and I have the deepest respect for the people who do that, but we don't have a clue. And so there are these stories. Another one that I saw a number of years ago was some researchers on a boat were researching dolphins, and there were a group of them, and they were out with the dolphins. And one of the crew members was feeling a little ill and went downstairs and lay down and died. And the dolphins around the boat started going nuts, just behaving in ways that nobody could understand. They seemed to be really upset, and no one could figure out the cause of it. Until eventually somebody went down in the boat and found that this man had died. How did they know? How do they know? And are we doing this? Do we have senses that we haven't even acknowledged? We haven't proven exist, and yet they're there. You hear stories, people who know when a spouse has died far away, or a child, or a parent. There's this knowing. So that to me too is like, what is here? What are we? Really, what are we? I'm kind of interested in these things. And I took a class, I forget what it was called. It was on developing your intuition or something like that. And we were allowed to read each other sort of psychically. And the very first day before, and then she warned us, don't tell anybody about you. We're not, when times comes to just sit around and chat, don't ask what people do, don't ask for information about them, just, talk about the weather, just nothing. So people didn't know anything about each other. And so, we sat down, we did this exercise with this woman who was there. And we did the exercise the way we were supposed to, and it was kind of okay. And then we said, let's just read each other. And so I tried it, and I was kind of surprised. I could feel something in my heart, and I knew that she had suffered a cardiac event recently. And I knew that her animal, her dog, was present and kind of went nuts when it was happening. And sure enough, it was right. How did I know that? And then she turned around and she said, you have this weird sort of religion where you talk to trees, you communicate with trees, and they are your friends. And it's like, I don't talk about this with people, but it's true. Trees are my friends. I have some very special trees in the world that might not be, they're not in my backyard. They're out there in the world, but I still feel connected with them. And I have, I have connected with these beings. And so, how did she know that? So I say this not to make you all believers in anything in particular, or telepathy or whatever, but to allow you for a moment to wonder, what is here? How is it that, say, your children came to you, these particular beings? I mean, we can explain it genetically, though sometimes I'm just in awe of that kind of coming into the world and going out of the world, and like how does consciousness sprout other consciousnesses? And anyway, so I realized at the end of our time, it's time for me to stop. But I'll leave you with this, and to kind of notice through the week, either one of those, it feels like a door for you to walk through. Either what am I, or what is consciousness? Notice consciousness, or what is this? What is the heart? What's actually here? Okay. All right. Thank you.